So we talked about shapes, we talked about how to take something that is 3D and then translate that into something that is 2D. So you take a 3D scene and you flatten it on the surface of your paper. That's what we did basically. Now we're going to actually reverse that process and take something that is 2D and translate it into 3D. It's a little more difficult, but just a bit. Okay, so let's look at some of these drawings. These are by Steve Houston, and he's just a master of both drawing and painting. So there's something in particular that interests me about these drawings. Just look at all this stuff here. One more. And then another one by a different artist. I had the name written somewhere. I'll post it later. These are good as it is, but just look at this dragon head. Look at this thing. You know, it just jumps out of that page. You know, you can really feel you can know exactly what the surface of this creature is. It's like a sculpture. It's amazing. So today's topic is form. That's the third player that we introduced to this little game of drawing. Uh, so we started with a dot. Then we used the dot to create line. Then from line we created shape. Let's use a different one. And today we're going to talk about how to bridge that third dimension and use it to make your drawings even stronger. So let's do a little test. This thing here, this thing right here, it could be a circle or it could be a sphere, right? You don't know yet. Circle or sphere? Well, we don't know. So this is how it goes. Uh, the artist, you know, with the little pencil, draws us this little thing here that we have. And the audience looks at it and, right, circle or sphere, they don't know yet. It's until, not until the artist lets them know, right? Because I know what it is, right? I'm gonna say that it's a sphere. I'm gonna say that it's a sphere, but I need you to know it too. So the question becomes, how can I turn this circle into a sphere? There's two methods that I know of, but I'm wondering if you can figure out maybe even more. So two methods how to turn this circle into a sphere. Anyone wants to take a guess?
Put some shading on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we could just right, shading. That's a good one. There's one more method. Can we figure it out?
Ellipse.
Ellipse. Yeah, right. So I'm guessing, right, let's just put that aside. And if we use an ellipse to wrap around that circle, now we're communicating its roundness. So it appears as an ellipse on the paper, but really it's a circle. It's like a hula hoop that you wrap around it, right? So I don't know if anyone can think of any more, then I would be very interested. But the two main ones are lighting through light and shadow. So lighting describes form. We may talk about that a little more in the future, but for now, um, it's a little it's a little too complex. So we'll just stick to the second method, which is basically sticking something on top. Yep. So to turn a circle into a sphere, you you stick something on top to describe its surface, right? So let's just tidy up this a little bit and try this once more. See if we can make it into a sphere without using any shading, right? So that's one and two. Maybe just, yep, let's do that. Right.
We could also just hatch a little bit.
Yep, hatching. That's a good one. I'm actually putting that with an indentation, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So now this, if we just, this is in the back, so we don't need that. And what we've drawn here basically is a ball. It's a ball for playing. Children play with those in swimming pools and so on. Now, let's say these parts are dark. So we could, do something like that. Right? But let's be a little more creative. Let's actually use that hatching. And you can see that hatching, in fact, it really helps it pop. But if you look at it, it's lines following the curved surface of that ball, right? So hatching is, and in general, texture. You can think of that as just texture. Texture is surface detail that you stick on top of that surface to describe it. So there's many different ways of basically sticking something on top of a surface. So, we have this ball here. You could have, some person's face, right? An ear there. And to really describe the shape of that face, they could have a badass scar like that, right? That's a scar. And because that scar sits on top of that surface, it helps define it, right? So you have this scar serving as a tool for defining that volumetric quality. You could go into a live drawing session and you would have, a person just, and they would have a belt, right? They have a belt. And that belt is basically something that is stuck onto the surface of their body and describes its volume, describes its roundness, right? Then you could further have that, if they have a shirt, you could create this little fold here, a fold there. So you're even using the silhouette to define that further. They may have boots, right? So having something like that would work. Having it sticking out works even better because now you're making a more concrete shape, right? Week two, better shapes. And you have this part here, define the volume of that leg. Now it's no longer, a popsicle stick. Now it's something that actually has volume. Okay. They may have, some jewelry, more jewelry there, or maybe just the color of their shirt. It could be sticking out too. So that also defines the volume of this. They could have they could have glasses, right? And what do the glasses do? They have this little point here, and that clearly separates the front of the head from the side of the head. So again, a very powerful tool. Why? Because it's something sticking on the surface of the object. And through that, it describes its quality. Okay? So it started pretty simple, right? You just draw an ellipse around a ball or something. And you get all these different incarnations of that. It's a very powerful tool, for drawing. So let's go back to the ball example. Let's draw the ball again. And there are all these, these things running around it. Now, what about this one? Let's draw it as a straight line. Okay, a straight line. And it's still a hula hoop. It's still a circle going around, but it appears as a straight line because we're looking directly at it. Now that, my friends, is a wasted opportunity. You get this frequently in real world, very frequently. But if you, look straight at these shoes and do that, right? Straighten up this belt too, you know. I don't know what to do with the color. Let's just leave it. But, right? See how it instantly flattens the drawing. It instantly flattens it because you no longer have this object describing the 3D quality of this guy. Man, he looks good. All right. So this is what we'll be dealing with in today's lesson and in the exercises as well. We'll be sticking something onto the surface of objects to define them further. What do we define about them? The thing we define about them is the most important quality that we'll be dealing with today. So what is form? That brings us to this question. Does anyone want to define form? Again, there's many ways to do it. I just wonder if you can, figure out something that I'm not familiar yet with. Definition of
Is it
form.
the underlying geometry behind an
Underlying
object?
geometry. Yeah, that could work. Yep. Okay, so underlying geometry.
Anything with depth, it gives depth.
Anything with depth. Yep.
Wireframe of an object.
Wireframe. Excellent. Yep. Cross contour lines.
You could also think of flat shapes repeating till they are a 3D shape. If you cut a person in slices, for example, and repeat those slices, get 3D information.
Slices. So like slicing the object to see what it's made of.
Yeah, that's BAMAS, basically.
Man, you guys are smart. It's great. Integrating in third 3D space. Right. So yeah. So like belonging to 3D space. Yeah. Excellent ideas. Like I didn't think of that many. This is great. And I learned a lot doing the demos for these workshops too. So, it's a win-win situation. Right. So great ideas. They're all mostly centered around one thing, and that is volume, right? So volume, you can think of that as the 3D quality of an object. It's 3D-ness. Okay, so that's the one and only quality that's important about form. That's the reason we're talking about it in the first place. Okay, so I would define form as anything that has this 3D quality to it. Okay, so a rectangle is not a form. A sphere is a form. A person is also a form. And because it's a very complex form, you could break it down into more simple forms, right? Again, with that big to small method. I told you it's everywhere. I told you it will be popping up all the time. Right. Excellent. So form is anything that's 3D. That's what's important about it. So, for example, we had a question about why do we differentiate um, between form and value? right? So values are the grayscale rendition of an object, right? From darkest to lightest, right? And everything in between. Now that's basically local value and lighting, light and shadow. So lighting is closely related to form. Lighting is a tool for communicating form, as we learned previously, right? We rendered that sphere and suddenly it popped out from the page. So lighting is a tool for communicating form. What about, right, lighting? What about perspective? That's a big topic. So perspective is also closely related to form. And you can think of it again as a tool for communicating form. So remember, form is anything that is 3D, right? Uh, it's whether it's a cylinder, a box, your house, or your car, whatever. As long as it's 3D, it's form, which means form is basically anything in this world, almost everything. So perspective is a tool for communicating volume, for communicating form. Uh, Another way of thinking about that is that if you're drawing a picture and, just drawing something and you have, a, a couple people there, someone there, someone there in the distance, and maybe a tree or something, you can think of form as drawing each one of these pieces as volumetric objects. So you could, do a little bit of shading, right? Or you could stick something on top. Let's give this guy a belt so that he has more style, but also so he appears volumetric. And now you can think of perspective as managing all these objects in space, about managing their spatial relationships and the way they appear with proper distortion and like they are part of the same picture, right? So good stuff there. All right, we're we're pretty much almost over the theoretical section here, so that's good. That's good, I think. Hmm. Yep. Right. So now I promised you, yeah, let's just do some little summaries or conclusions from this new stuff that we talked about. Um, Here's the thing. Dot, line, shape, and now form. The third and final player on our little battlefield. Dot has no width, no space, no volume, right? It's 0D. Line has length. That's 1D. Shape has length and width, and that's 2D. And form, as we learned today, is 3D. So this is by the way why we mentioned dot, even though people usually never mention the dot, because it's so simple. But it completes, along with the others, this logical progression from the simplest to the most complex object and element that you can find in a drawing. As far as I know, there is no 4D drawing, okay? So if you do all the exercises and learn to draw all these guys, um, now would be a chance to give you some kind of diploma because you've just completed the fundamentals of drawing. It's not going to get much more complex from now. Uh, so you can have, light and shadow, and you can have perspective and composition and color theory and edges and brushwork and all these ideas, but they're all kind of things that are, above this. This is like the bottom of the pyramid. Okay, so you have all this fancy stuff, but it rests on this solid foundation. So these are the drawing fundamentals, the main ones. There's many more, but this is the fundamental fundamentals, if that makes any sense, right? So we usually don't have to think about the dot as much, so let's just get rid of that. And what we're left with here is line, shape, and form. And these guys, they create this kind of, you know, this holy trinity with which you can draw anything, right? I don't know. I just like drawing shapes. Whatever. Uh, so yeah, lighting would be probably the next important step along with perspective. But this alone is enough to make a good drawing. It's enough to make a really good drawing. So for like the drawing of that playing ball, it had no lighting, right? It had no lighting. There was no light source, no direction, no shadow, and it still read as a playing ball. It was a good drawing. So this is enough. It's enough. Everything you put on top is a bonus. Okay. You know, let's just pull these examples. These are by Tim Gula, and he's a master draftsman. These are some imaginative drawings. I mean, just look at that beauty. And uh, the only thing that these are made of is lines, right? These little. Then there are shapes, like this little thing here. Let me just pull that as a layer instead. That might be better. So you have this huge shape. See that? Break it down into smaller ones. This negative shape, or maybe like that. It's just beautiful. You separate that further, you would get probably some kind of big, medium, small going on here. And then you have lines defining shapes in this section, right? And defining volume and form in this section by going over the surface, kind of like texture, right? Here, like that, like that, like that. That's as if you were drawing a simple sphere and you just followed its contour, right? It's no more complex than that. Same thing here. So just lines, shapes, and forms. You can think of the drawing process as using the line to draw shape or form. So you're either drawing shapes or forms, and you're using lines to do it. So, for example, you know, if you were drawing the human figure or something, um, and you would draw like the thigh or something going in the knee, then this is a shape, right? Then you kind of follow that and let the viewer know that it actually has volume. Stick something on top there, right? Like texture. This serves as a core shadow, right? So that's a bit of lighting. Right? I already, put this roundness here as if you had a boot, right? Remember? That doesn't look like a boot, but you get the idea. I should draw more boots. Shadow there. Flat shape. Right? That's a shape. That's form. That's form. That's shape. This is a very bad shape. And this is form, right? So I'm going back and forth using lines to draw either shapes or forms. That's the drawing process in essence. It's very simple. It's so simple that a lot of people don't figure it out. There's many ways to draw. There's many ways to draw. Um, this is a very common and very efficient one. Now here's one of those red pills that I promised. All forms also have a shape. Okay. So, well, maybe a sphere is not such a good example here. Let's take a box. We already kind of mentioned that in the previous week. So this is a box, and it's also a what do you call that? A hectagon. Right. So this is a box, and this is a hectagon. It's both of these things simultaneously. If you tilt it in a different direction, this is still a hectagon, but a different one. Let's just use the same box so we're consistent, right? So something like that. And the outside shape is a hectagon. And then there's a shape inside that, and that's a rectangle of sorts. You could tilt it in a different way, have this kind of thing going on, right? And it would be a square. This may seem ridiculously simple. It's almost insulting to your level. Some of you can draw really well, but let me just bear with me, and I'll try to show you what I mean. Um, yep. So this is a drawing by Hokusai. He's probably the most well-known and celebrated artist from the Asian region in the 19th century. And people often say that the Japanese, they have a very evolved sense of design. Because while in the West we discovered the rules of perspective, and from then that point on we were obsessed with making things look 3D, with giving them form. In the East, that didn't happen, and they were mostly interested in good shapes, right? So you can just oh, can just see this thing here, and it's all over again. We did that last week, so let's not go that far, but you can see that it's very flat. It's very flat. Then you have this different approach where all you're focused on are volumes and making things look 3D. This is by Karl Kopinski, a master draftsman. Um, yep. So you could still find very good shapes there, but it would be a little more difficult, you know. This is technically a well-designed shape as well, but they're not that obvious. It's a very realistic drawing with very natural shapes. This is also by Karl Kopinski. So he's mostly interested in a different aspect of drawing, in the 3D aspect. So while Hokusai, he was enforcing this flat graphic quality of a drawing, Karl Kopinski he's concerned with something else, right? He's using all these, look at the mane of that horse. It's following the surface of that head, describing it. This harness, same thing, right? Same thing here. Even, the saddle and the leg could count as more and more things that describe the volume of that horse body, right? And then you have a different approach. So this is a poster by Mucha, and he's a famous Czech illustrator, very famous in the mainstream. And what's praised about his work the most is how appealing it is. So appeal, that's an interesting word. We haven't talked about that yet. And Mucha, he's different from Hokusai. If you look at the head of this girl, uh, it's perfectly volumetric. He's describing form very effectively there. And then look at this shape here. It's completely flat, right? So that's interesting. And what's even more interesting is that a part of that flat shapes is in front of this 3D object of that girl's body, and the second part of that is behind her. It's like an optical illusion. He's making fun of you. It's a joke. It's he's playing around with this truth, that this simple truth that the drawing is both 2D and 3D at the same time. It's both a 2D surface you draw on and a window into 3D space. And that's largely a part of why Mucha's drawings are so appealing, because he's aware of this reality and he's constantly shifting between it, right? So 2D, 3D, 3D, 2D, 3D, 2D, 3D, 2D. Just goes back and forth, constantly reminding you, hey, it's a flat surface. Hey, it's a 3D scene. Hey, it's a flat surface. Hey, it's 3D. And you realize on this roller coaster of of twists and turns. Uh, More of these. Right. This is by Dean Cornwell, and it's if you compare this to the Kopinski piece, they're both excellent draftsmen. But Kopinski is all about that volume, and Dean Cornwell is about the volume and about the form. So it's like he wants what Hokusai has, that graphic quality, and he also wants that 3D quality that Kopinski has. Leyendecker. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Again, great shapes, great shapes. Leyendecker, he even kind of, what's interesting about him is his process. If you look at this part, this white gouache, um, this is really interesting. So Leyendecker, he paints the actual thing that he's drawing, and then he goes over it with white gouache, and he uses that to carve out the silhouette, right? Look at this tiny little negative shape here at the pinky finger. Without it, it wouldn't be complete. So he's using the gouache as a step in his workflow to make sure that he has absolute control over his character's silhouettes. Same here. Paints a head and then goes over it and carves out the silhouette to make sure that every edge and turn is well designed. So the first step that he uses is making it 3D, and then he goes back and enforces that graphic quality of that object. Super interesting. This is by Mebius. Yeah, I mean, if you look at this composition, this is crazy. She's pulling out that sword out of the sheath almost as if she was showing it to you. It's straight pointed at the camera, straight on. Why? Nobody pulls out a sword out of the sheath like that. So he did that specifically to let you know what the silhouette of that sword is. He wanted to make you go, hey, look, that's a really cool sword. I'm gonna double check that you see it. Mebius is really interesting. He's really aware of that 2D quality. So he makes these silly little heads on his characters, specifically so that in every shot they have this interesting silhouette to them, right? It's pretty interesting. Uh, Jean Giraud, I think, is his name. I mean, even his photograph looks like one of his paintings. It's crazy. Yep. This is again by Muka. I don't know why this is so poorly organized, but these are some of his more, well, less commercial pieces. Look at this guy here. He's holding the circle, the ring, specifically to let the viewer know that it's a circle, to make it extra clear. These guys as well. These are flat, and the background is 3D, so super interesting. This is a more contemporary example. Tanzi Hui, he's a great artist. I mean, that's just, I mean, look at this guy. It's like that, no, that, and then there's another piece going like that. That's it. Yep. So the reason why I'm showing this to you, the reason why I'm showing this to you, where was it? Right, we did this little chart here where you go from that to that. So some people mentioned, maybe asked if, this is just a dynamic sketching course. And I do take a lot from dynamic sketching. But if you think about dynamic sketching, for example, and I went through dynamic sketching years ago, and in dynamic sketching, you start with line and then go into form, right? Like, I don't care if they skip the dots. It's not that important. I mean, it is in design, but not for drawing as much. But for example, the shape. I started with dynamic sketching and I realized the importance of lines and forms, of having good lines and making things look 3D. And it took me years to realize just how important this little step here is. Um, Shapes are probably the most important building block of design and making things look interesting and appealing. Form will make things look correct. Okay, so if you draw, a leg or a car or an anime girl or whatever, and you give it a lot of form and volume, you'll make it look correct. But it won't help you make it appealing. Only shapes can do that. So hopefully you'll start to kind of take into account the whole picture and maybe do a little bit more research on your own and see where that takes you. One more example here. This is one of my favorite painters, Mikhail Rakhmatulin, and this guy, he's he's crazy. I mean, this, yeah, look at this. That's ridiculous. It's a triangle. It's a freaking triangle. He just puts a triangle there and says, "Yeah, this is a knight," because it's got all this realistic rendering, and just look at it. It's a He doesn't care. You can have a triangle be a knight. That's fine by him, you know. So I think these are very appealing, and not so much because he's a master painter or because he can draw volume, but because he knows what makes a good shape and what makes it appealing. This one in particular, let's just show you something real quick there. That's a pretty cool character. And what I want you to focus on here is this part here, this glove. Let's take a look at that. It just goes out, in, out, out, in, out, in, out. And then kind of repeats that there. So, this is the volume that's there, right? This is the volume. And if you rotated it, rotated it just a bit, so you're looking at it from this angle, it would look something like that. That's what it would look like. Suddenly, all this graphic appeal is lost. Just because you tilted it, it's the same form. The volume is the exact same, but you tilt it a little bit and you lose everything. Same with this part here. So you have these two pieces of cloth, right? And you have these negative shapes inside, these holes. Now, what would happen if you took this sheath and moved it a little bit, like that? That could happen, if the character took one step to the left, and you would lose both the negative shapes. You'd suddenly be this one huge mass, That's instant loss of graphic appeal. Okay. He actually uses this weird shape as a signature. I mean, look at this part. Right here. That's almost the exact same shape, just translated, transferred. It's like a signature for this character. And maybe if he makes another character, he's going to use a different shape. Who knows? So when I talked about, the different rotations of the box, having different shapes, it actually matters, right? It matters. The rotation and position on your canvas can make a huge difference. That mostly gets into design thinking. For now, if you're aware that there is such a thing, that your drawing is both 3D, a window into a 3D scene, and a flat 2D collage of shapes, and that you actually have to manage both of these to have a good drawing, that's enough. That's a good takeaway, I think. Okay. Right, so we have some exercises to help you practice your form, to help you make things look 3D. So we'll do that in a bit. And for now, let's take a short break. You're all probably tired. We've been talking for a while. Right. Oh, by the way, is this clear so far? Are you guys following? Does it make sense? Or did I just confuse the hell out of you?
Make perfect sense to me.
I have pity with the dots, though.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they can be important in some aspects. Maybe they are more specialized.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Definitely.
If you think of voxel or like manga rendering techniques, print, suddenly dots are everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. You can use, pointillism is an entire style based on dots, where you use dots for rendering. Dots have a great importance in composition, great importance, because they give you position in space and they draw attention. That's an important one. They draw attention through contrast. Um, but yeah, that kind of deserves a separate workshop, I think, like a design and appeal kind of thing. For now, we're just focusing on drawing. And for drawing, we're mostly concerned with lines, shapes, and forms. Yep. Right. So if you can think of anything uh, any questions or anything, then I'll just answer that after the break. For now, let's take a 10. And I'll see you then. Stretch your legs, take some coffee. Yeah. just to make a little summary there, what we talked about was, the form, what it is. It's the 3D quality of something. How do you spell that? Yep. And we talked about the logical connection between dot, line, shape, and form. That these are kind of the building blocks, the elements that you can use to build a drawing. So, yep, it's on form. There will be a recording in a couple days. So let's do the actual thing that I promised. So I'll give you two exercises. Two exercises. Okay, don't sign off just yet. Uh, so you can probably, this kind of tells you, dynamic sketching. But I do have a little bit of a couple notes that you can use to learn a lot from drawing form. So let's go through the task here. Step number 1, draw a shape. What kind of shape? Yeah. Could it be that? Well, ideally, you make it a little flatter at the bottom and a little more pronounced at the top. Okay, so a shape like that is not as good as a shape like that. Well, this part is kind of dumb. Round it off. Sure, why not? Let's go through with that. So the bottom side is a little more flat. Now, to kind of make it more interesting, you can add a negative shape. Let's do something like that. Oh. Yep. Okay. So we have our shape, right? The positive and the negative. And now, here comes the tricky part. I want you to wrap stuff around it to define its surface. Okay, as we said, I don't want you to define it through lighting. I want you to define it through sticking something on the surface. So the way you do that is that you set a direction, this one for example, and then draw a line. Here it meets that volume and goes around it. You can kind of end it with a little arrow if you feel like it, but you don't have to. Okay, and that defined this part of the surface. Okay, let's do another one from a different angle. So we have this huge lumpy here. What is it? Okay, different ways. You could kind of flatten it like that. That would flatten it. Or you can keep it pronounced like that. Okay, that defines this part of the surface. Let's use this negative shape here. It's been sitting here all alone, so let's give it some love. Slowly and consciously. Now it meets the form, goes around it, and tucks in, goes again, and now we have this huge lump here. Remember? A little arrow at the end. And you can kind of, a way to check if you are correct with the exercise is that these parts, they all connect. This one, this one, this one, right? This one and this one. This one and this one. So what we're doing here is we're actually defining two objects. We're defining the form and we're defining a ground plane that it's sitting on. Okay. We're defining the ground plane because we're sticking something on its surface at all these, this area, this area, this area, and here in this area. Okay. Let's do one more. I kind of want, this is kind of unresolved. And the cool thing is that, you know, so you set a direction, and that's obvious. And now the question becomes, which way does it go? Like, does it go that much or that much? Or does it do something weird like that? You know, I don't know. That's up to you. Either work. Actually, let's leave this one. You know, let's see if that works. Okay, so it ends here and follows in its original direction. Draw a little arrow. Okay. Let's do one more to define this one, and then we'll move on to the other step, to the step number 3, 4, I don't know. Yep. Okay. Now, what's next? What's next on the menu? Let's look at these examples that I did earlier today. Right, so a shape, a little flat at the bottom to make things easier. And you don't have to. You can just do that, but it's more difficult. It's a little more difficult. It helps to see the ground plane if you leave this part kind of more flat. Okay, so same here, same there. This is kind of crazy. So the next step is to actually apply texture. And we'll keep the things really simple. So Peter Han, in his dynamic sketching course, he focuses on texture quite a bit. I don't focus on that too much. So we'll just keep it very simple and use A, hatching. So that's this kind of deal. And B, kind of a chainmail. And chainmail is this kind of thing. So these are the two ones that we'll be doing, and they both have their reasons for being on this list. Let's see how that goes. Wink. Okay, so this is hatching. This is circles, the chainmail. Some of you may already kind of see why chainmail is here. You know, lots of circles, and when they turn, lots of ellipses. They all follow the surface of the object. That's the goal of this exercise. Hatching again, I kind of wanted to see if I can do, you know, this squiggle thing and get away with it. It kind of works, not really. It was an ambitious project. Let's leave it at that. So how do we do this? How do we do this? Let's start with hatching. It's the easier one. So hatching is lots of lines spaced at roughly the same size and roughly the same width in between them. Roughly. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be exact. Like here, the length here is much bigger than in this area, and the density here is much lower than here. Okay, so but that's okay. It's okay. It doesn't have to be exact. What matters is that you're learning to see this 2D thing. And it is 2D because you're drawing, whether it's on your screen or on your paper, you're drawing on a 2D surface. Your paper is flat. It's as flat as it gets. And you're learning to translate that into the third dimension. You're learning to give it form. Okay, so, and okay, just a little thing here to mention. If you didn't do the week 1 exercises, I would really recommend that you do them now because otherwise this will be painful. Uh, so these lines, when you rub them around the surface, I mean, if you look at this, it's lines already, right? It already has lines. Okay, so they're just little sections of arrows. You can think of them as that. They're sections of these arrows that we already drew. So see this part, just replicate that. Okay, replicate that again and again and again and again. Ah, right. You can use these straights, or you can do the thing that we did in the previous week and break them down into straight lines rather than curves, right? So this works too. If you change the if you change the direction, you can create a curve just the same. Works the same way. Try both, see what works, see what feels better. So one more note about this so that you learn even more. Let's draw our little familiar ball. And let's draw a different view of that ball. So imagine that the ball, this is like a top-down view, okay, a top-down view. And this is our little beach ball, okay. So it has these strips going across its surface, and you're looking at it, right? This is your eye, and you're looking at it. Now check this out. Right? See what happens. The spacing when you're looking at it from the front, right? The spacing is really big, and as the plane turns away from the viewer, it gets more dense. The spacing gets more narrow. Okay? So let's apply that. And in that direction. And in the remaining directions. The center, it kind of gets jumbled up. Maybe just put that little whatever there. But you can see how decreasing the spacing helps turn the volume. It helps it turn away from the viewer. Okay, so very important principle, very important. Right, so here we're looking at it from up close. Let's do this negative shape. That's a good one. So it starts really dense and then it gets more spacious and then it gets really dense again, right? Because it's turning away and then it's again straight on. Let's do this one here. Pretty dense, spacious, and pretty dense again. Spacious and dense again. Oh, yeah, this thing here. Dense spacing, more spacious, dense, more spacious, more dense, and more spacious. Sometimes it feels almost mechanical, like it's not gonna work in the end, but you have to trust in the technique and trust that if you do these things, then it will turn out reading as a 3D volume. Okay. So watch out when you apply this technique to your figure drawing, you're gonna drop some jaws. Anyone can do this, you know, almost anyone can do this on a simple form like that. And I believe everyone here is more than capable to do this kind of thing. But when you start applying it to your actual work, well, that's where it gets interesting, right? The direction doesn't matter as much, but what helps is if you think about that thing we said earlier, right? If you have the beach ball and you have these ellipses and you place one that is just a straight line, like that, damn it, like that, right? That's a wasted opportunity. So, for example, here, these kind of curve, I could place them like that, but it would be a wasted opportunity. I have placed down a single line that doesn't tell me anything about the volume. If I place down 1,000 line like that, I'm just wasting my time. And I'm wasting your time too as a viewer. This kind of reads 3D, so I think we can move on. You don't have to do the entire thing. I kind of did there just because it's mesmerizing. It's really relaxing. And it kind of, yeah, yeah. It's pretty cool. Uh, you can see here that it almost creates a sense of lighting. It almost creates a sense of lighting, but it's not lighting. It's not. Uh, there's no defined light source. Like you might say, yeah, the light source is at the viewer. It could be, but think of it as texture. Think of it as something wrapping around the surface of the form, right? Look at this part here. It's turned out pretty good. You can do this thing where you or here, this part. When you have, this kind of object, you can create these roles and then kind of, do that and do that. What's helpful, what's been helpful to me is to kind of think of form as bread dough. Bread dough, when you mix flour and water and you make bread, uh, then that bread dough, it's really kind of sticky and heavy, and it kind of when you place it on a solid surface, it kind of melts, right? It does this kind of thing. So if you've ever grabbed bread dough in your hands, you can really think about that vividly. Okay, it kind of helps. One trick for drawing volume, um, is to just really be conscious about that 3D quality, about that weight. Yeah, let's do the chainmail real quick. So again, with the chainmail, if you have a ball and you're looking straight on at it, then you have just a circle, right? And at the centers, because the spacing gets more dense, you get this really skewed circle, a really skewed ellipse kind of shape. Then you just kind of extrapolate that. So almost turns into a line at the edges. Right? See how it turns away? It instantly feels more volumetric. And then just repeat it for the remaining. So again, what also helps is doing these strips of texture and then filling what's in between. So let's do like a simple one there. Add a little thing here. Keep it simple, keep it kind of nice and convex. Draw very slowly and very consciously. Feel that form. Imagine how it's turning and imagine how it's heavy. It's like that scene from Harry Potter where he has to cast the Expecto Patronum spell, and the guy teaching him, the professor, he tells him to have a really strong memory and hold that. And he thinks about the memory of his parents, and it's just so strong that it blows away, the whole room and everything. And that's kind of the same thing here. The stronger the idea that you have while drawing this, the more volumetric it will feel. Like here, look at this part here, right here. That kind of, it has this kind of this huge thing. I was almost imagining that there is a force, like this bread dough is sticking to the end of my point. It's sticking to it. And as I draw that, and then it lets go, right? Very strong idea, and it turns out very volumetric. When you forget about the fundamentals and draw everything just slowly and consciously, just imagining, this vivid idea of what it is and how you want it to feel, that's when your drawings will really kind of pop and come to life. Okay, let's do the chainmail. We got a little bit more time. So straight here, right? And really turning away there. Okay. So let's just extrapolate. And I'm using, my wrist for, or my elbow, my elbow to put down these little ellipses. If you draw them smaller, you use your wrist or maybe even your fingers. If you draw them larger, you can use your elbow or your shoulder. That's lesson from week number 1. Right? Here it kind of faces us straight on. And here it's more tilted. here. Right, so this part here is kind of like the section here on this sphere. That's what I'm thinking about. And really squeeze them when you get to the part where it nears the outside silhouette. You know, when people draw cylinders, that's another example. They sometimes do this thing where they do this, right? And it works as a silhouette. It looks kind of right. But if you just fill that in, you get this fish shape. And where you really turn the form is at the edges, okay? This part here, that's what's important. That's what matters the most. So you have to really turn this in. If you haven't drawn lots of cylinders, then you know this, right? This part here. It has to be round and really turn that volume. Same here. Same here. Right? The edges is where you really squeeze it and kind of milk that that technique. Right. Let's do some more bigger ones so that we have this quickly out of the way. That will do. You get something like that if you go all around. Here's one of those balls. Yep. Okay. We have one more exercise, only for the really strong ones. The ones who still aren't asleep and are there to see it. We'll be drawing mushrooms. Lots of mushrooms. Not that many, just a couple ones. So I picked mushrooms because they are, well, except for these guys, they are complex. But mushrooms are simple. They're simple objects, and they have these distinct chunks to them. Let's just pick a really simple example. This one, for example. So look at this guy, looking there all smug. Doesn't know yet that he's about to be drawn. So you can use reference, or you don't have to. The mushrooms, they're so simple that you can just make them up mostly. I want you to start, you know, maybe with a shape. You can start with a shape, kind of see where it takes you. I don't know, just something random like that. That could work. Again, with those shapes. He won't stop it. No, I won't. Now, I have to separate this top part from the bottom part. How do I do that? There or here? That's up to you. Could be there. Let's do something fun like that. Right. So kind of fit that mushroom in there. Maybe there's like a little bite there from a slug of some sort. Keep this part convex. And this part has to contain the lower section. So the lower section of a mushroom can be really boring. If you think about mushrooms, they're like that. That's one hell of a boring shape. Like this part is especially. That's like a look at that's like a double S curve, some weird kind of, Yeah, that's not allowed, okay? That's not allowed. You have to make that more interesting. That's why I started with this shape to kind of force me into thinking about it a bit differently. Right, so maybe I can do that into an S, block this off, like that. That looks like a mushroom drawn by the guy Tanzi Hui, just wonky everything. Yep. Okay. So let me just quickly. Okay, that's kind of fun. I should have done a separate layer that would make it easier. But here comes the important part. This is the lesson from last week, right? Drawing big to small and learning to see. Now, the mushroom has different parts, and they all have a bit different texture. So we've talked about lines, and we've talked about the chainmail kind of thing. The chainmail is a little more difficult to pull off, so handle with caution. If you do all your exercises with lines, it's fine. It's fine. So okay, I'm thinking about going lines for the bottom section. Like, let's just do these. You could, you know, see if that works. I'd actually maybe make it more difficult than it already is. So let's do, these lines long and increase the spacing. And decrease the spacing.
Shimi, how would you do the contour that shifts from the C curve to the S curve? Like that gap right there. How would you do that one?
This one?
No, between that C on the left. I guess that's more of an S. Left of that. You see how it goes from like a C to an S? How would you do the transition curve?
Like this one? I'm not
Now
sure.
move your mouse to the right.
Right?
Right there, right in this gap right here. It seems to transition from C to S.
Oh yeah, right. Oh
So
yeah, right. C and S. Hum. Well, I kind of it's kind of what I mentioned earlier about if you have this form and you know that the line is going to go like that, but this here, that's all fair game. Like I would not recommend that you go below this this, right? That would imply that there's a hole in the ground plane. So maybe don't do that. But if you do, this one, or if you do that one, or if you do that one, that's all fair game. You can do either of those. If you do a C curve, you're gonna have an easier job, right? Now it reads very clearly. If you do an S curve, now you're saying that there's a dimple in there, right? Okay, so you're just gonna have to take that into account. And when you do your lines, you're gonna have a little more difficult job, right? Uh, but either of those is fine. Like, it's not set. The only thing that's set is the beginning and the end. Anything in between works within reason, and you can have fun with those. You can experiment. Uh, I made kind of a transition from a C curve into an S curve there, and what I said by that is that there's this protrusion here happening, this dimple. It's like if you took your finger, like let's say this is the tip of your finger, and you kind of mush into it, like you're sculpting, you're modeling the clay or something. You just make this little groove. Yep. And I kind of consciously skipped this one, right? Again, straight line is a wasted opportunity here. You can do a straight line, it's fine. It's just, it doesn't tell you anything new about the volume. So it's not as efficient. Now, this one is a little tricky because I want to go with the chainmail kind of deal. So the chainmail is a little more difficult, so it might help if you still do something like a little line kind of description there, maybe do a little dimple there, just to make it more interesting. And then you can go into the chainmail, or you can go chainmail right away. That's fine. You guys are gonna be so good at drawing mushrooms, you won't believe it. So I have these big grooves, those are these ones, and then I have these smaller ones. It kind of goes inside, like let's just go with lots of straight ones, and it kind of goes in at these points. You can be these are really small lines. Maybe a bit longer will be more comfortable for you. Right, so I have this thing and I want it to go up. If I want it to go up, then it has these two sides, this side and that side. And if you think about the volume, then you know that this side will be more turning away than this one. This is pretty straight on. What does that mean? Tighter spacing. Yep, you got it right. So again, more spacious and more dense. You know? And since this is the turning edge of the whole volume, then you can just go really overboard. You can have tight, little lines, or you can do more like scribbles, like that. That could work too, right? That works. As long as you're, like, it doesn't matter if you're doing these lines or these lines. What matters is that you're wrapping them around the surface and you're thinking about the surface. Right now, this is not a flat canvas. It's a window. It's a window into a 3D space. I have my little, hand here with the stylus, right? And what I'm doing is I'm not drawing on the surface. I'm reaching into it and caressing these little grooves, caressing, going back and front and over the surface, really visualizing that, right? I'm doing it digitally. Unless you're really comfortable working digital, I would recommend that you do it traditionally. With fine liner or rollerball or ballpoint pen, doesn't really matter at this point. Charcoal might be pretty difficult, so maybe don't do that, but yeah. Again, following this side and also following the roundness, right? Something like that. Maybe somewhere there around the bottom. The spacing will also be a little more dense to kind of turn it back underneath. Make it really feel like it's kind of, this thing here is like a blob kind of melting on the ground plane. The stronger the idea, the stronger the drawing. Right, we wanted the chainmail. You can guys think of like if you have any questions or anything after I'm done with this mushroom. We're probably gonna finish it off. And by the way, I wanted to really thank you guys for filling out the feedback forms. Uh, Most of you did, and that just makes me so happy. You wouldn't believe. Um, and you can think of those. I'll post a feedback form again, and you can think of those as purely selfish thing. Because if you give me a good feedback, that means I'm going to use it to make a good workshop. And that workshop will go back to you. Turn it at that edge. Yeah. Let me make a little strip there. Now it's, oh right, the dimple. So you can do these kind of intuitively and just using that little ball, you know, as a reference. Or if you're a little, if you've been doing a bit of perspective studies in your spare time, then you know that these are ellipses. This is a practice of drawing ellipses. And you can think of the minor axis as being a normal against the object surface. So if you pick this point and extend it in the direction of that surface, that's way too long. Now you know that this will also be the orientation of that circle. This gets really tricky, you know, in these kind of wobbly volumes where. Do you guys have any questions?
I got
Yeah,
a quick you go
you
ahead.
go first.
Yeah, sure. So when you have your shapes and you're hatching your circles, when they're really like when you're turning an edge, you're making them tightly spaced, right? And then when it's more in your and the
Yep.
and the so then can you articulate why you use the big shapes?
Oh, you mean why I make them bigger and then
Yeah, so
smaller?
it makes so it gets tighter as you turn an edge, but as you get away from the edge, they get bigger. Is that basically it?
Um, I mean, if you wanted to take it a step further, then you have this circle here, and as you move it closer to the edge, it becomes more angled, you know, more squished, more squished, and B, it becomes smaller overall. Why? We'll talk about that in the perspective stuff. Basically, when something is further away from you, it has to be smaller, right? So, uh, if you make this, you know, horizontal, then it's not going to be the same width. It's going to be a little smaller. I just draw them, intuitively. This I knew this is in the front, so I just made it really big, and this is in the back, so I made it really small. I mean, if you can do this. You can make them smaller as they turn away, and it's gonna look beautiful. It's gonna look absolutely beautiful. It's gonna be a beautiful mushroom, but you don't have to. The goal of this exercise isn't, again, it's not to make a pretty drawing, even though if you make a pretty drawing, it will motivate you better. The goal is to learn to draw consciously of the form, to draw while perceiving the form and being aware that it's there. Okay, so this is not a flat shape, this is a 3D thing. Yeah, right, talked about that. Does that answer the question or?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Cool. What did you say, Reyes?
Oh yeah, I realized that all your exercises are organics. So will you cover boxes exercise and cylinder exercise in the next section, like when you cover perspective?
Boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough
Oh.
question. And I actually have to kind of answer that with a reverse question because perspective is so complex and so kind of important that it deserves its own workshop. So I'm gonna make a workshop, a perspective workshop, probably after this one, because it's closely related to form drawing, and it makes sense. But it's not exactly set what we're going to do the next week. Someone requested that we do a little bit of light and shadow. So we might do a little bit more like less organic stuff with more harder edges. We could do that. And my question is like, what do you guys want to do? So I kind of reserved the last week for summary and recap and just review of the homework and that kind of stuff. But if there's something you want to talk about and we haven't talked about it yet, we can do that.
I would find it interesting if people try to make this homework their own in terms of like, chainmail is a good exercise, lines are a good exercise, but maybe someone might even find their own style by finding their own technique in hatching.
Yeah,
It would be interesting to see an exchange.
yeah, that would be great. I'm trying not to make things too like unnecessarily complex, but if you want to make them more complex, by all means. I picked hatching and the chainmail because most other textures are a combination of these two. So if you get really good at these two, you'll be able to draw most other textures easily. But you can do anything. Like you can clearly see that this is not just this is way more complex than just simple lines, right? I just simplified it really a lot because I wanted to get this kind of interesting quality of the mushroom surface, right, where you have these bumps. Uh, but yeah, I have this link, with these couple mushrooms, and uh, it's a fun one. Like this kind of texture that's really interesting. You see these little things. It's like highlights, but you can place that down as dots. You can play that down as dots and vary their spacing again according to the same principle to get a more realistic look, right? That's a fun texture. I didn't talk about the textures as much because I think the main focus should be the volume. Like if you can draw volume, and believe me, I said that if you have trouble with the week 1 line exercises, this is going to be really, really difficult. Uh, uh, I'm relying on line work to do all the heavy lifting, all of it. I'm not thinking about the line work, and that's why this exercise works for me. Um, so, and in the same way, when we talk about perspective, I would really need that you guys know how to draw form, right? Because in perspective, for example, you'll do the thing, where you have like a character, in space or something, and then you have their location, and you have this horizon line, and you want to draw another character somewhere there, right? And the way you do that is by going across the ground plane. You go like that and like that. So that's back and to the right, and you find that location for your character, right? It's going to be a little smaller. And see what we just did there, this line. I drew this line, and it only works because I'm conscious about the ground plane. Like when I draw that line, I'm not thinking about drawing a line that is this long and that long. That wouldn't work. I'm thinking about a line that goes back into space and then turns right, makes a sharp turn. That's this. That's this exercise. Drawing lines that actually sit in the 3D space. Okay, so if you have trouble with this, you're gonna have a whole lot of trouble with perspective. Okay, so gradual steps, gradual steps. Good lines make good shapes make good forms, and good form makes good everything else.
with light and shadow only. Next week, boxes is a little bit hard because you have to include perspective and everything.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of tough because that's why I asked you guys what you would actually prefer because boxes, they are closely tied to perspective because when you have a box, when you have an object that has, these lines that are all parallel, they actually converge to a vanishing point somewhere there. So it's very difficult to talk about boxes without talking about vanishing points. And that's basically perspective. But we can do some exercises for boxes. Yes, we can do that. And we can lightly touch up on light and shade. I still have to think this through kind of if we can squeeze that into one lesson. Because light and shade is also pretty difficult. You have to talk about the how light works and how it bounces around the scene. And that can take up some time, but we can do it. Yep. So I'm just collecting ideas, and then I'll kind of use them to build up the week 4 class. Right. So I think this mushroom is about as done as I am willing to make it. And look at the shape. That's a fun shape. Like if I didn't start with this method, with the big shape, chop it up, chop it up, chop it up method, uh, I would most likely end up with something that looks like this, you know. And I just prefer this version. I think it looks cooler. Right. Let me just so this is for the if you have a moment to fill that, that's the feedback form. So if I messed up something and if you got bored to sleep and or something, you can roast me there, and I would be very thankful for that. Okay, so I think you deserve a little summary because we talked about a lot of stuff today. I actually wanted to keep this lesson shorter than usual, and it's longer than usual. What do you know? So let's just get this out of the way. Dot, line, shape, and form. That completes our little journey throughout this workshop. You've all kind of withstood it. I've been tormenting you with the most boring exercises imaginable, and you managed to go through it. So good job. Um, we now have a decent overview of what makes up a good drawing, along with a couple other things. So what's missing here is the practice. The practice. So I told you to, fill out a couple pages with line exercises. The truth is, when I did the line exercises, you know, when I went through these things, I did them for months, for many months. And on one hand, I have to say that it was like it can be pretty boring. On the other hand, I never managed to improve as fast as I did by practicing my line. So it's a good investment in a solid drawing. So, saw the elements. We talked about the form. We talked about a simple truth that many people don't realize, and it's that forms also have shapes. So, shape and form are kind of a different side of the same coin in a drawing. And those artists who are aware of this simple truth are usually the ones who manage to make their art really striking and memorable. We listed a couple of those, like Alphonse Mucha or Tanzi Hui or others. So this duality, your drawing is both 2D and 3D. That's a that's an interesting thing to realize. We talked about drawing form, about the two ways that we can use to communicate form, to turn a shape into a form. Okay, so those were lighting, and those were, wrapping something. Uh, which has many different incarnations. You can, wrap belts or shoes and jewelry around your characters. You can wrap arrows around your forms that you'll hopefully do for today's exercise. And it's a very powerful tool for making drawings look 3D. And making works 3D is it's a good skill to have. If you then choose to break that rule and like Alphonse Mucha when he has this 3D character, beautiful volumetric, and then he just smacks a flat shape in there with complete confidence. That's up to you. That's up to you. I'm not here to tell you what to draw. I'm just here to give you the tools that will enable you to draw what you want. Right. So that's about it. This is kind of a summary of the whole workshop. Um, I'll see what I can do for week 4. We'll review the homework that you can submit either to the workshop channel or to me directly, and we'll talk some more about this stuff. Right? Any last questions, or are you guys all good? Oh shit. Damn, that's beautiful. Oh man. Oh, wow. In the earlier drafts of the lesson, I wanted you to design mushroom characters, but I didn't know exactly how to go about it. But, if I did, then this is how you would go about it. Oh yeah. Let's just take this one, for this is great. Ooh, right. Okay, so this is perfect. Okay, this is perfect. What would be really cool, or actually this is already cool, what would be even cooler is what I mean, is if you kind of managed to incorporate this, to use these features to further describe the surface of that mushroom. Like it's turning, right? It's turning. So use that, uh, it, chainmail, right? Chainmail. Maybe overlap it there, you know, or maybe even here. It'll be for extra depth. There, right? And then these guys, the eyelids, they also help describe the round volume of those eyes, right? So here it kind of tucks in, so you could have like another one of those right there, kind of following that into the. Oh, that's maybe a little too much. Oh boy. Just nice little bedroom eyes. And then, you know, if you make this little fold there, we also talked about how to make these folds. Then you can go over it with those smaller lines, right? And then describe that, like go in, right? Like that, for some extra depth. Yeah, this is amazing. You know, same with the mouth. The mouth is a pretty complex thing there. I already did a pretty good job there. No need to redraw that. The shadow here, right? Shadow, great. So you could use the shadow to further describe the surface. Something like, right? So the shadow is mostly gonna have round, right? So straight is a wasted opportunity. So you could make it round, right? And then you can make it follow the individual. Make that, right? Now this part is gonna be in shadow, and the drop shadow is going to further describe this amazing volume that you have going on here, right? That's maybe a little too pronounced. They should be probably more shallow, but you get the idea. And yeah, nice job there. Nice job there. Yep. More spacing, less spacing. Really turn that volume there. You know. Excellent. You can give your mushrooms a face if you want. Oh man. This one is that's just beautiful. I mean, those those S curves just flowing there, and then this bulbous thing at the top. That's really interesting. Like from design standpoint, this is solid. This is really solid. Those little hatching marks there that are kind of irregular and concentrated at the lower half. Yep, that's good stuff. Hmm. You know, if you look at like in the beginning, we had this right. So we went over these guys. You can really tell that Steve Houston here is thinking about the volume. He's obsessed with volume. Just look at this thing. He's just enjoying it, making up maybe muscles that aren't even there. Like there's not that many teres minor muscles in here, but you know, just whatever. Yeah, just really feeling that volume, feeling it, right? It just pops right out of the paper. It's amazing. So that's kind of the thing that we're after here. This guy, right? That's our little mushroom hatching technique right there in action, right? You can use it on mushrooms or you can use it on a dragon head. Doesn't matter. Same thing. Same thing. See these rolls there, right? He's having fun with the volume, making these little notches and grooves and just describing this kind of looking afford that form. He probably started with some, weird sketch like bang, 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 super simple shape, whatever. And then he went back in and kind of looked for that. What's the form? Is there, going like that or like that? And that's the process of drawing. It's really enjoyable. It's really amazing. That's what you get if you practice the fundamentals enough that you can kind of stop thinking about the fundamentals. Oh yeah, right. Who's the guy? Oh damn. Where is he? No, not that one. I'll post it in the workshop too. I had his name somewhere. Yep. All right. So if there's no more questions, all right. Thanks, guys. See you on Wednesday or next week. Yep.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.